Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Mushett. I'm a reporter here at the Western Standard, and today my guest is Michelle Stirling, a communications manager for Friends of Science, a nonprofit run by retired Earth and atmospheric scientists, engineers, economists, and other energy business experts, supported by a handful of contracted services. They offer insights on climate science and related energy policies for public and policymakers. So today, we're going to be discussing a relevant not scientific study, but it's been done recently. It's been in the news a lot. It's called Prevalence Magnitude Distribution of Climate Change Anxiety in Canada. So basically, they came to the conclusion that they surveyed more than 2,000 people, and they came to the conclusion that 2.35% of these people have climate anxiety to the point where it's clinically relevant. And so I'm asking Michelle here today because we want to see if this is something that people should actually be worried about and whether they should be this affected by climate change narratives. So, Michelle, thank you again for joining us. So the first question I have for you is, should people be this worried about climate change to the point where they're actually experiencing anxiety symptoms?
Well, I would hope that they would not be, but when you have the media pumping out a constant drumbeat of climate emergency and, everything in the world is caused by climate change, whether cows are getting fatter or thinner, or birds are flying higher or lower, whether leaves are turning yellow earlier or later, and it's all your fault because it's climate change. Of course, people who are somewhat susceptible to that kind of fear, would experience this kind of anxiety because the mainstream media just won't let up. And it's not like they're offering, balanced narratives where they're saying, well, this group of scientists says we should be worried about cows getting thinner because of climate change or more extreme wildfires because of climate change. But this group of scientists says, well, in the course of the longer history of the Earth, 4.5 billion years, actually, things are not more extreme and we shouldn't worry about it. And also extreme weather events, like, say, a flood or an event like a wildfire, they're unrelated to climate change. They're integral to just how the world operates. So, when you look at the data, you get a much different impression than when you read all these terrifying headlines.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, since you were talking about the narratives that are pushed by journalists a lot, and especially certain media conglomerates and stuff, why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Because in your correspondence to me, you told me a lot about the incentive, lots of people are investing in these media conglomerates that have a stake in the climate change narratives. So why don't you talk about that?
Yes, well, if you read the work of Matthew Nisbet, so he's a well-known commentator on the large green philanthropies. And he did a study in, I think it was 2018, called Strategic Philanthropy in the Post-Cap and Trade Era. And in it, he looked at some of the major green philanthropies in the States. They're putting out about $600 million a year to push green narratives. And they fund a lot of journalists. They fund a lot of academics. And these would be big organizations like the Oak Foundation, the Moore Foundation. He lists them all. There's about 13 of them. So they put this money out. They actually also came up with this plan called Design to Win. And in it, their plan was that they would fund these ENGOs, environmental non-governmental groups, to campaign for policies that the green philanthropies wanted because they're invested in renewables and EVs and such like. And then it would make it look like it's a grassroots campaign. And we've seen a lot of that in Canada with the tar sands campaign. And most of the funders of the tar sands campaign, which has been going on since the 1990s, they are funded by these large philanthropies. So that's one thing. So this is also how a lot of academics get funding. They just, whatever their topic is, they add climate change and voila, they get funding. There's also something that the Western Standard reported on just a couple of months ago. There are also these major funding of projects that are climate change behavioral psychology. So they're actually funding people who study psychology, trying to figure out how to force you to comply by using behavioral tactics. So those might be things like incentives, like, oh, you'll feel happier if you take action on climate change. Recycle your cans and bottles today. Things like that. And they may seem small, but they all add up. And, this persistent drumbeat of climate catastrophe really burdens a person. And when you think of the millions, billions of dollars being spent on trying to make you comply with climate narratives, no wonder people are scared.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And on the subject, you also told me that there's a psychologist named Margaret Klein Salomon.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry. Who released a study in 2016 on the climate emergency, and she was pushing for climate emergency, and she kind of founded this kind of narrative. So, yeah, why don't you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, Margaret Klein Solomon was actually a trained clinical psychologist. So she was trained to help heal people. And I guess the thing that really bugs me about her is that she used the very same skills that are used to heal people and flipped them and used them to scare people. So she appears to be kind of the originator of Our House is on Fire. And her project was called the Climate Emergency Mobilization Plan. Her theory was that, if you know that your house is on fire, you take immediate action. You don't sit there and wait for another day. And of course, the theme, Our House is on Fire, I believe she set that up in 2016. That subsequently transferred over to Greta Thunberg. Now, Greta Thunberg, of course, gave the big speech, how dare you? Our house is on fire. And obviously, she's an autistic girl by her own statements, sees the world in black and white. And she was obviously actually really scared, terrified. And by taking action, it did help her. There's an interview with her father where he said how happy he was to see that when she started doing school strikes and such like, she started feeling better because she was doing something about climate change. The thing that most people don't know, though, is that she was sponsored and propagated by this group of, well, I call them carbon trading kings, called We Don't Have Time, which is a very large organization. And they had attached to it an extremely powerful social media campaign where they planned to get 100 million followers to follow her on her school strike. Well, they got way more than 100 million, I think. Anyway, and that's right in their IPO, in their initial public offering. So, there's this huge money behind all of this because they're trying to create two carbon trading systems in the world. And people won't comply with this if they know it's going to cost them more money, but they will comply if they think their house is burning down and our planet is burning up, and to save it for our children, we must take climate action now.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you talk more about so what is the two major carbon systems you said in the world? Like, what is that and why are they trying to make those?
This all goes back actually to Enron, which was an energy company in the late 1990s, known as they like to call themselves the smartest guys in the room. They weren't that smart because the company ultimately went bankrupt. But what had happened is they made a bundle on cap and trade at the time that coal plants were required to reduce their emissions. And coal plants at that time were emitting a lot of sulfur dioxide. This was the time of fears of acid rain. And so they made a lot of money on cap and trade, but these coal plants found a way to quickly filter their stack emissions. And soon this cap and trade market evaporated. So they looked for a new one. And of course, carbon dioxide runs through everything that we do, every form of energy. Even when we breathe out, we're breathing out 40,000 parts per million. So, it's kind of a big market. So these green billionaires saw the potential to set up 2 cap and trade markets in the world. And they got one going in Europe. They tried to get one going in the States. It didn't really fly. The Chicago Carbon Exchange, I think it's called CCX, I think it's still operating, but when Al Gore left to go to the UK and start his Generation Investment Management company there, which deals a lot in all this carbon trading, I think the shares on the CCX were about 5 cents. So it wasn't very powerful. Now, they keep trying to set up a global carbon trading system, probably 2 systems, one in Europe and one in North America and Asia. But it's not working out because Trump just stepped in and said, I'm getting out of the Paris Agreement. And not only that, I'm not going to let you guys put a global carbon shipping tax on anything. So another aspect of this that we in Canada should be very wary of is it's called Article 6, which is part of the COP agreements, then part of the Paris Agreement. And Article 6 is about international carbon trading. And if you look on the government website, you'll see a thing called nature-based climate solutions. So they want to actually start cashing in on the natural beauty of Canada and selling carbon credits worldwide to large emitters. So you won't be able to enjoy going to the park because they'll be trading carbon on it and they don't want you to burn it down if you inadvertently tossed your cigarette. So these things are all happening behind the scenes and most citizens don't even know about it. All they know is being scared to death.
Yeah. Wow.
And just before we go on, there's this group called Covering Climate Now. It's a group of media outlets, journalists, and such like. They like to interview people like the director of Mad Max, who gave them tips on how to make climate fear compelling. Okay.
Wow.
So, these are supposed to be journalists. And this coming week, they're going to be starting a new campaign called the 89% Silent Majority, where this is like 500 media outlets around the world reaching 2 billion people. And they're doing this new fear-mongering campaign and social proof bandwagoning campaign, trying to get everyone to say, yeah, we want more climate action. The thing is, they never talk about the cost of climate action or the benefit. The cost is enormous. I think we spent $9 trillion in the past 10 years or something trying to get to net zero. This is globally. And there's been almost no change in energy transition. And also the benefit. If Canada reached all of its targets, and there's proposing that we should spend between $2 to $5.2 trillion. If we met all of our targets for that, we'd reduce global warming by 7 thousandths of a degree Celsius, which is immeasurable.
Wow. Yeah. Well, also going back to the survey a little bit, I wanted to talk about also the study mentions how people who say they're suffering from this climate anxiety are suffering because they also experience extreme weather, types of extreme weather. Yeah. But then you also told me about how people, usually they measure the climate change by just, cases of extreme weather. So then, but usually cases of extreme weather occur, what did you say, 30, 50, or 100 years?
Well, the measure, people always conflate climate change and weather. So
Mm-hmm.
weather is what happens today and here and now and in the next week. Climate change happens over 30, 50, 100-year periods, millennial time frames. So these are very long time scales. And there has to be statistically significant changes in weather patterns to call it climate change. So sadly, if you experience a flood or a wildfire, of course your life is turned upside down. It's terrifying, but that's not climate change. That's an extreme weather event. And the problem is the media and all these weather attribution people are conflating this and further scaring the public. If you look at the statistics, you'll see that wildfires statistically have been declining. We do have some areas of Canada that have burned more. That's because we have a lot of standing deadwood. We should be clearing out that deadwood, especially near communities, and then we wouldn't have these extreme wildfires. But, we're not doing that. Instead, we're spending money on wind farms and carbon capture and storage, all kinds of very expensive stuff that won't stop wildfires. But we don't spend anything on what would stop wildfires or would help us fight them.
Okay, yeah. Well,
just on that note, in
yeah.
fact, Dr. Harper, one of our former consultants, said at one point when he was talking about how Mother Nature really is, we live on an active planet, and we shouldn't confuse the active nature of Mother Nature with our impact on climate. He said, most people don't live long enough to experience the slightest of climate change.
Well, I think these are all my questions I have for you today, unless there's anything you'd like to mention. But yeah.
Well, I would just like to mention, that I think it's a real crime that people are scaring children. I think that's a real moral failing on the part of the climate activists, because little children are easily scared. And, there was reported in the National Post I think it was around 2019, that a woman complained to the school board because her child came home. They'd been showing clips of Greta saying, we're all going to die. We've only got, 12 years left. And so the children in the classroom, at least one of them was like, I don't want to die. This is how terrified these little children were. And that's a crime. Of course, those young people grow up feeling like there is no future. And then we wonder why we have depressed youth. And I will also say, I just want to drop this in. At one point, I was invited to give a presentation, or actually a poster, for a Canadian mental health awareness workshop on mental wellness at work. And one of the issues I wanted to discuss and demonstrate was the fact that people who lost their jobs in the oil and gas industry during the downturn due to the tar sands campaign, would be depression. But if they go to a psychologist who's on the climate change bandwagon, they're going to be treated for climate denial, right? Which is a terrible thing, because here are all these graduates of STEM courses, which take years and years of very hard courses to pass, and they're really experts in their field. Their jobs have been defeated by know-nothing climate activists like Greta. And then they're going to be helped by a psychological community that's actually on the climate crisis bandwagon. And you wonder why? Well, it's probably good money, to have clients who suffer from climate anxiety, that's also a moral failing in my view.
Wow. Oh yeah, that's true. So is that like a thing in Canada, where if say someone suffers experiences like a trauma from like how their city is flooded or something, I don't know, the extreme weather, some type of extreme weather, and then they go to a psychologist and they say, oh, like you said, they're according to the psychologist, they're denying the climate if they're not that upset or something about it, or I don't know exactly the scenario. Maybe you can explain more on that. But is that a rule? Like they have to do that? or?
Well, I don't know that it's a rule, but I would say based on the comments that I read in the CMHA website, they're all on board with the climate crisis. And so they would be affirming the fact that people would feel afraid. And
Oh.
it, it's I think that's really a travesty because
Mm.
when people are feeling that afraid, you should be able to separate, oh, the fact that you lost your job is what's causing you the grief. And it wasn't climate change that made you lose your job. It was this know nothing activist funded by billionaires who did that, and I'm not going to give you a prescription for depression because we can talk about what happened to you and your job loss, and it's real and it's painful. But how do you go forward from here? But I'm not going to try and treat you for climate denial. That's, but I think that lots of people probably are being treated for climate anxiety and climate denial. And it's, people need to look at the facts and the evidence and realize if you read the book, The Little Ice Age, How Climate Made History by Robert Fagan, or his other book, The Great Warming, you see that there are very powerful natural influences that change the climate. So you don't have to feel guilty about it. Nothing that you do will stop climate change. And you certainly don't have to be treated for climate anxiety when a good look at history will help you find your footing and not feel afraid.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that's definitely something to look at. History is, has all the evidence you need, I think. So, well, yeah. So thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciate you coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, if you guys enjoyed this video, you found it informative, please don't forget to check out our actual YouTube channel as well. We have more videos like this. And you can also check out our website, which is westernstandard.news. It's $10 a month and $100 a year if you subscribe. And you can also check out Michelle's articles, which we have on our website too. And she tells a lot about climate science. So you can go check that out because it's very informative. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.